Written by Katarzyna Soca and Clare Ferguson. Copyright European Union 2017. Source EP. The key focal points of the November plenary session included debates on the rule of law in Malta and Poland and on the Paradise Papers revelations. Members adopted, inter alia, their positions ahead of the 11th WTO Ministerial Conference and the Eastern Partnership Summit. They also adopted resolutions on the new EUAfrica strategy and on the Ombudsman's activities in 2016. Parliament heard a formal address from Andrej Kiska, President of Slovakia, and finally, the 2017 Lux Prize was awarded at a ceremony held on Wednesday. Paradise Papers. The international consortium of investigative journalists' recent revelations, known as the Paradise Papers, were the subject of Council and Commission statements. Parliament's Inquiry Committee into Money Laundering, Tax Evasion and Tax Avoidance (PANA) is due to report on its work following the ICIJ's previous Panama Papers exposé during the December session. The Paradise Papers are certain to lead to redoubled EU efforts to clamp down on practices involving offshore interests and tax evasion and avoidance. Multilateral negotiations. In view of the 11th WTO Ministerial Conference, with the WTO Ministerial Conference to convene in Buenos Aires from 10–13 December 2017, members adopted a resolution on multilateral negotiations in view of the 11th WTO Ministerial Conference, confirming Parliament's commitment to multilateralism. Some of the main priorities for discussion at the Ministerial Conference are fisheries subsidies, agriculture negotiations, and domestic regulation of service providers. Rule of law in Malta and Poland. The Parliament debated the situation of the rule of law in Malta after the Council and Commission made statements. In the resolution adopted by 466 votes to 49, with 167 abstentions, members called upon the Commission to begin dialogue on the rule of law with Malta, and to look at its application of the existing rules to tackle money laundering. Following a debate with the Council and Commission, members adopted by 438 votes to 152, with 71 abstentions, a resolution calling on the Polish government to comply with the European Commission's recommendations on respect for the rule of law. The EU could launch the Article 70 EU procedure should the Polish government fail to respect these recommendations. Recognition of professional qualifications in inland navigation. Members largely supported the proposed directive on the recognition of professional qualifications for inland waterways. The complicated system of national professional qualifications is thought to deter young people from working in the sector. The text agreed in trilogue on rules on the recognition of qualifications in inland navigation seeks to harmonize the rules to attract more young people to take jobs in the sector. Listen to podcast Professional Qualifications in Inland Navigation. Cooperation between national authorities responsible for the enforcement of consumer protection laws. The European Parliament approved by a large majority the agreement reached in trilogue on the 22nd of June on the proposed regulation to update and reinforce cooperation between national authorities responsible for the enforcement of consumer protection laws. The EU wants to strengthen the current system of alerts and mutual assistance to deal with problems encountered in cross-border shopping. The rules approved will give national authorities more powers to investigate and enforce the law. Protection against dumped and subsidized imports from non-EU countries. Protection against dumped and subsidized imports from China and other third countries is vital for many EU industries. When China's WTO accession protocol expired in 2016, the EU moved to ensure protection against dumped and subsidized imports from countries not members of the EU, using trade defense instruments to address problems such as overcapacity. Consequently, the EU institutions reached agreement on a revised anti-dumping regulation to protect EU businesses from these unfair trading practices. Members discussed and adopted the text agreed with the Council in trilogue, with a large majority. Relations with New Zealand. The EU-New Zealand Partnership Agreement signed on 5 October 2016 was referred to the Parliament for consent. Following a debate, Parliament consented to the conclusion of the agreement, and also adopted a resolution focusing on the common values shared by the EU and New Zealand, their strong and long-standing economic and cultural ties, and their reliable cooperation, both bilateral and within international fora. Eastern Partnership. November 2017 Summit. Parliament adopted its position in advance of the Eastern Partnership Summit, scheduled for the 24th of November 2017. The Eastern Partnership (EAP) is the eastern dimension of the European Neighbourhood Policy, launched in 2009, and encompassing the EU, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine. In their resolution, members insist on giving new dynamism to the EAP, differentiating between partners depending on their willingness for greater EU cooperation, assisting civil society, implementing the association agreements in place, visa liberalization, and the new EAP model. Activities of the European Ombudsman. In 2016, Parliament held a debate on the report on the European Ombudsman's activities during 2016. The Ombudsman conducts inquiries into cases of maladministration by EU institutions, bodies, offices and agencies. The resolution underlines that complaints against the EU institutions fell slightly in 2016, with transparency-related issues and access to information and documents the top subject matter for complaints. The EUAfrica strategy, a boost for development. Given the dynamic demographic growth in Africa, young people will be the focus of the next summit of EU and African heads of state or government, which takes place at the end of November in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. The Parliament adopted a resolution defining its position on a new relationship to replace the 10-year-old Africa-EU joint strategy. The new priorities for EUAfrica cooperation include a focus on human development, particularly for employment and education for the young, good governance, and human rights. Listen to podcast New Priorities for EUAfrica Cooperation. Opening of trilogue negotiations. The Civil Liberties, Justice Home Affairs Committee decision to enter into trilogue negotiations on the proposal regarding criteria and mechanisms for determining the member state responsible for examining an application for international protection lodged in one of the member states by a third country national or a stateless person was approved, following a vote in plenary. Negotiating mandates adopted by the LIBE Committee on 3 further proposals were confirmed unopposed. Lux Prize 2017. On the 14th of November, the Lux Film Prize for 2017 was awarded to the film Sami Blood, a story about a Sami girl from the north of Sweden, who overcomes prejudice against her people in her quest to become a teacher. This, at a glance, note is intended to review some of the highlights of the plenary part session, and notably to follow up on key dossiers identified by EPRS. It does not aim to be exhaustive. For more detailed information on specific files, please see other EPRS products, notably our EU legislation in progress briefings, and the plenary minutes. Read this at a glance on Plenary Roundup, Strasbourg, November 2017, on the think tank pages of the European Parliament.